Good afternoon. My name's Paul Latham. I've been invited here today by PASBA because I think I bring really about three things that are quite interesting. Number one, I'm actually a chartered accountant and I owned an accounting business in the UK. So I think I get you guys. I think I know where you're coming from. I'll talk more about the accounting business, obviously, in a moment. Having sold the accounting business in 2001, I've gone on to do lots of other things. I took a business public, grew it to 400 people, grew it to a market cap of about 400 million. I invested in a business in 2008 for $500,000, sold it for 50 million last year. And the only reason for saying that is that I think I understand not only where you're coming from, I think I understand where your business owner clients are coming from. And then the third thing, and probably the most interesting aspect for the point of this presentation, is that in England I say, I've got a time machine. Because you see, the changes that's happening in the USA with regard to accounting today, it happened 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago in the UK. So this need to become more value-added and more relevant began to happen in the 1990s. And in the period between 93 and 2001, we transformed our accounting business from being basically a traditional small accounting business what I call looking backwards, typical services like tax returns and accounting and so on, and we transitioned it to be 80% looking forwards, and we grew the business and we sold it for a significant sum, 45 million back in 2001. So those three reasons: A, I'm an accountant, I understand you; B, I think I understand your clients; and three, I think I know what's happening with the changes that are coming your way. So we're just going to take you through a presentation about transitioning from being a backward-looking accountant to become what I call a forward-looking advisor. I'm going to start with why I think you should be making this transition, and to be honest, I think it's an imperative because the world is changing, and then spend a bit more time on how we're going to actually make the transition work. So I'm going to take it as read that you understand that there's change happening in your industry. And basically the big message is, as accountants, you need to stop looking backwards and telling your clients what's already happened, in terms of the accounting or the tax return for last year. And I'm not saying, by the way, that isn't a great service, but it's what your clients expect. And there's a little message at the bottom there of the screen, which is you can't add value to the past. Basically, don't be satisfied with only talking about what your clients expect. Start becoming forwards-looking and start actually talking to them about what your clients value. And the other message at the bottom there is you can only change the future. You can't change the past. So if you're going to add value to clients, it has to be somewhere looking forwards. And basically, you need to start to introduce new services, high-margin services for you, add-value services for your clients. And I'm going to talk you through what I call business advisory. And the reason why I'm focusing on business advisory is that I believe it provides what I call a shorter runway from the past to the future. It's essentially, although it's a good thing to do and it adds value to your clients, it's really a bridge to the even higher value services, advanced tax planning, wealth planning. Because if you're talking to your clients about their business and beginning to understand them better, it becomes a more natural conversation then. Here's how I can help you further. So that point of it being a bridge is quite important. Another reason why you'd start talking about to your business owner clients, and I know PASBA, you have a lot of business owners, you'll probably recognize this. Their business is their baby. They it's like you talking about your kids. You like talking about your kids, you like talking about your baby. Your clients like talking about their business. It's not a difficult conversation to get started. And what you can do is help them do a couple of things. First of all, point them in the right direction. Are you going the right way? Clarify direction. But then, and ultimately, how to help them create the best business they possibly can, what I call maximize business potential. And that means grow the revenues, grow the profits, grow the value, and so on. And basically, as accountants, I'm going to use this little, by the way, apologies, I can only do the pointy thing to one side. But basically, as accountants, what you're doing really is deepening relationships. And if you're going to do that, I think that's a good idea. The only thing you have to bring is the mindset that you want to change the way you actually work. Because if you think you're going to do it the way you've done tax returns and so on, that isn't going to work. So you've got to bring a mindset for change. And there are really 3 key change areas that most CPAs or most accountants need. They typically need help in selling, in this case, business advisory services. Most accountants I know, most accountants are not really natural salespeople, so they usually need coaching to what I call look different. If you're going to, I look at websites of CPAs across the USA, and in truth, they all look the same. They all say the same things. They don't look different. I think you need to start looking different, and you probably need some coaching and some behavioral change. Ideally, you have an ability to change in terms of the way you deliver your business advisory services. And because I know accountants, they like consistent systems and processes. And certainly at Hayden Rock, we've built an advisory delivery service around consistent systems so that it just works like a process, like an audit checklist, if you like. And then probably one of the biggest things where you're going to have to change, but also one of the biggest areas where I think you have the biggest opportunity as small accountants typically, is your ability to provide your clients with access to expertise. And I'm going to talk more about that in a moment, because ultimately, when you talk about business advisory services to your clients, you are going to discover that they've got a few problems, and you need to help them to solve those problems. And clearly, you can't personally solve them with every problem. So how can you point them towards the right expertise? And probably that third area is one of the biggest opportunities for small accountants. Talk about it in a few minutes. In terms of what I'm going to concentrate on today, I'm going to mainly concentrate on delivery and how you can begin to deliver business advice. But I'm just going to start with the other two, the selling and the resources. So, selling business advisory services. Biggest problem you've got, and I'm not talking about anyone specific in this audience, but as a group of accountants, you and your peers have created a perception in the minds of your business owner clients. They basically think that as a group, accountants are reactive and backward-looking. And if you're going to be a business advisor, you have to become proactive and forward-looking. So you need to change that perception if you're going to sell business advisory services. Use me, I'll be great at business advisory services. You need to change that perception, or you will most likely fail. And the way you change that perception, you're not going to walk in to any single client on a given day, on a Tuesday, and just change their perception. We advocate a phased transition, if you like, baby steps, as to how you change the mind of the client. And I've listed them there, the 1, 2, 3, 4. So you start by, number 1, getting the client talking. Do a diagnostic. We have a business diagnostic. If a client fills a diagnostic in, it'll take them about 20 minutes, and I guarantee you'll have 15 to 20 things to talk about to that client. So you begin to generate some activity. You're not charging them for it, you're just generating some activity. You then position that client, and I'm going to talk in a few minutes about what I call plate spinners. All of your, I know none of your business owner clients, but I can pretty much guarantee that 90+% of them are what I'd call plate spinners. They're spinning plates and trying to keep everything going. And you see, if you go through that diagnostic, they'll recognize themselves. You can begin to position them and say, if you're going to start growing that business, and let's say you can spin 15 plates, do you really think you can spin 30? Do you really think you're going to be able to double your business by carrying on doing it the same way? And the answer is clearly and obviously no. So if they have aspirations to grow, they need to change. And the first thing we actually get them to begin to do is say, Where are you going? What do you want your business to look like? It's like going on a journey. If I didn't know today that I was coming from Boston to Clearwater, do you think I'd have found my way here? Of course not. Every journey you go on, you always start with direction. And it's no different in business. If you don't know where you're going or what you want your business to look like, there is zero chance of that happening. So we take the client through what I call a vision workshop to begin to say, let's describe the type of business we're beginning to create. And from there, we can move to regular advisory meetings. And the whole name of the game for this is for you to meet regularly with your clients. You don't want to be seeing them once a year or even twice a year. You want to be seeing them 6 times a year, bi-monthly or monthly. And it's by getting in front of them and being with them, understanding their problems, that you're in the right place at the right time to begin to offer those add-value services. Implementation of solutions. Essentially, you guys have been at a massive, massive disadvantage for many years now, because probably there's been bigger accountants down the street, and they've had more resources, and that your business owner clients get to a place that says, you know, I like Joe, but he's a bit of a small accountant, I think I need to move on. And the great news for you is that those days have changed. You see, in the past, it was very, if you can imagine all the types of expertise that a client would want, it was way too expensive for you to employ all those people and way too risky. So you didn't, and you didn't have the resources. So you didn't have a wide range of expertise. But today, it's really easy at the click of a button to have a virtual team. I was showing somebody, I forget who it was, but just out there half an hour ago, and he said, I'm actually the smallest accountant in the world, but I really love this virtual team idea, because suddenly you've got infinite access to experts. You've got their pictures there, their bios there, they're part of your team. It costs you nothing, and suddenly you look bigger than the biggest accountant down the street. So actually, I think you're in a great place to begin to do what I call compete and win. And I think that's almost the best thing that's happened in the last 25 years for accountants like yourselves. So let's get into delivery. I already said, I think it's imperative. I mean, I invented our business advisory delivery system about 30 years ago. And the reason I invented a system was because I employed a few people, and I wanted everyone to do it the same way. And if you don't have a system and a structure, A, you can't get everyone in your team doing it the same way, and B, it's just really hard. So having systems and structure and processes in anything is good. And as a generality, accountants like structure and they like logic. And so if you can turn business advisory into a structured, logical system, then it becomes really easy. And it sort of becomes a crutch for you in terms of how you support, and it makes the delivery easier. And it's what I call painting by numbers. Everything just follows a process, and you look smart. The alternative is to try and do it without structure. And the bottom line is there, you'll always be reinventing the wheel. And even worse, your client, because your client will be talking about their business, and inevitably they know more about their business than you do. If you let them lead the conversation, you've got a problem. Whereas if you, and I'll show you in a few minutes how to begin to do this, if you lead the conversation, they will follow you. So whatever you do, don't try and provide business advisory without structure, without a system. Do not let the client lead the discussion. And just to give you a clue how this works, I mean, many years ago, a client would give me, let's say, a business card, and let's just say they did design engineering. And they'd say, so what do you know? How are you going to advise me on design engineering? What do you know about design engineering? And I usually had that business card to hand, and I'd say, do you know what? I couldn't even fill the back of that business card with what I know about design engineering. I know nothing about design engineering. But the truth is, you're an expert in design engineering. You don't need me to tell you how to do design engineering. What you need is someone to help you grow your business or grow their business. And it's the same. The same rules apply to every business. And you begin to turn the tables and you start leading the conversation. And once you have that structure and system, then you can be coached in it. Coaching, as it says there, breeds confidence. And advisor confidence is key. Because you see, at the moment, you're all experts in what you do. You're experts in bookkeeping or payroll or accounts or tax or whatever, and you exude confidence because you know what you're talking about. If we're talking about business advisory, inevitably, there's a training period, and inevitably, you're not going to be as confident in the beginning. It's sort of like learning to swim, and you just need to be able to do those, I'll just do one length or a width, and I'll have my armbands on, and you need some support to give you the confidence. So coaching is important. So how do we begin to create a framework for business advisory? And there's a little map, and again, I'm going to point on this side. Apologies if you're looking on that side. This little map, going back 25 years ago, and bear in mind, this was pre-internet days, so I knew nothing about them when I walked in. And I used to start my conversation with sort of two things. I used to say, first of all, two sorts of accountants. There's forward-looking ones and there's backward-looking ones. We can cut this real short, because if you're looking for one of those, I'm not interested. But if you're looking for one of those, I'm really good. By the way, I never met a client ever, who said, actually, I'd like a backward-looking accountant, please. They all said, I'd like a forward-looking one. And then, having established that, the second thing, I used to draw that diagram. I didn't draw it as prettily as that. I used to scribble it on a piece of paper. But said, those stages there, they sum up your entire business. And bear in mind, there was nothing on the internet. I couldn't see what they did almost. There's only three things you can conceivably do. And one of those is go public, and you're not going to do that most likely. So you're either going to grow this business with a view to selling it, or you're going to go down that squiggly, windy line towards a succession. And they're really different from each other, and the strategy that you should follow to make the best of it is different. And if I'm going to be your advisor, it makes a big difference. If I know you're going to sell your business, then ultimately you're going to hopefully create a capital gain. At the very least, I'll probably create an efficient capital gains tax structure. If I know you're going to pass the business on to your kids, I'm probably not going to do that. I'm probably going to look at estate planning or something. And the other difference is, that one's a straight line. Sale is a straight line. Very structured process. There's only one thing you have to do to build a business to sell, and that's create one that looks like one somebody else wants to buy. And there's only about 10 things in the world that people buy businesses for. So it's really structured and easy. Successions are more difficult. They're more idiosyncratic. My advice to everybody is, if you're not sure, then assume a sale, because it's probably what they're going to do, and it's probably going to point them in the right strategic direction. But before you get to what I'd call the where part of it, what about the now? Where are we now? Well, businesses are either in the startup zone, i.e. just starting, or they turn the corner and they go, you probably can't read that easily, but it says entrepreneurial zone. Successful startups turn the corner, go into the entrepreneurial zone. Adjectives: passion, zeal, zest, enthusiasm, knock down brick walls, make things happen. That's what those guys and ladies are like, those entrepreneurs. Eventually they reach a size where they start trying to grow management teams. And in an ideal world, they start moving to that place there, properly managed zone. But the truth is, they don't go there. They go to a place that I call the in-between zone, somewhere in between entrepreneurial and properly managed. When I talk to clients, it probably took about as long as it's just taken me to say that before, I'd have been in the room 5 minutes, and they'd say, that's where I am, in-between zone, that's where I'm going. How can you help me? And there's sort of an example of you leading the conversation. And basically, I can pretty much guarantee all of your business owner clients are somewhere in that place, entrepreneurial, in-between zone. They all look very similar. They have very, very, very similar business problems. And basically, they're plate spinners. And they know it, and they recognize it. And they also recognize that it's impossible. As I said before, if you've got an ability to spin 15 to 20 plates, they are not getting to 30 by doing it that way. They have to change their style. They don't know how. You can begin to help them. And the only criteria that you're looking for is a business owner that, I mean, I'm using a yardstick of $1 million. It doesn't have to be specifically $1 million of revenue, but around about $1 million of annual revenue, they're probably at a point where they need help. And the other criteria is they need the desire to want to grow. And if you look at your business owners, I could say roughly, if you've got, I don't know, 100% of business owners, 2/3 of them will be complacent, and 1/3 of them will have the desire that they want to do better. And your only job, really, is to identify the 1/3 over $1 million, and I promise you that they will want some help. And the great news is that they have incredibly similar problems that starts with lack of direction, and you can begin to productize solutions. And I sort of talk about creating a box of added value, because the trouble with the service that you offer, you see, it's a bit like, I'm going to be proactive. Well, what does that mean? It doesn't mean anything. And if you're used to charging hourly rates, that's a big problem as well. Because, you know, I tried this 25 years ago. I've been proactively thinking about you for 5 hours, and I'd like to charge you 5 times X. And you get a very swift response. What you've got to do is begin to say, I'll do this for you. I'll help you to clarify direction, or I'll do whatever it is. And productize it, put it in a box. This is what you're going to get. This is what it costs. And basically, sort of re-emphasizing a message here, by following this sort of process, and it always starts with that map and the plate spinning thing, you have an opportunity to control the discussion, because 99.9% of your business owner clients have never built a business before, and they don't know how to do it, and they're looking for help. And if you lead the discussion, I promise you, they will follow you. So now let's start to begin to break down how do we deliver business advice. And it starts from a really simple concept, one that I've used, you know, I hesitate to think about how many thousand times, but I use it all the time. There are 3 ingredients of business success: vision, plan, and desire. And a real quick test I always used to do is say, tell me out of 10, but just quickly, out of 10, how clear is your business vision? And typically they'd say 7 out of 10. They were bullshitting, but they'd say 7. And if I really, really wanted to press them, I probably could have done, but I accepted the 7. And then I'd say, how clear out of 10 is your plan to make that vision happen? And on average, they'd say about 4 out of 10. In other words, they were a bit more honest. And then finally, I'd say, and how strong is your desire to grow your business? And they'd nearly always say 10 out of 10. And I'd say, okay, well, the good news, that's great news, because you see, I can help you with vision, what you want your business to look like. I can help you with plan, but you've got to bring the desire. I've not learned how to inject you with desire. And if we're looking at your probabilities, see, these things iterate. They all multiply off each other. So the highest score possible is 10 times 10 times 10, which for the accountants in the room equals 1,000. They scored 7, 4, and 10. So 7 times 4 is 28, times 10, 280. Quick, back of a napkin calculation, 28%. I give you a 1 in 4 chance of maximizing your business based on this. And even if we flipped a coin, it would be 50-50. And if I said to you, shall we flip a coin as to whether you're going to grow your business properly or not, of course they'd say no. Well, I can tell you now, it's usually worse than that. And that sort of got their attention. And then you begin to build. So what does that mean? So vision. Well, like I said before, if you're going to try and get somewhere, you do need to start by knowing where you want to get to. And it's the same with building a business. What do I want my business to look like? Establishing direction is a given. If you do not know what you want your business to look like, you have zero chance of getting there. Most business owners drive around in their metaphorical business in circles. They just drive around and around and around with no direction, and it's no surprise that they don't get to where they want to get to. But from your point of view, as their advisor, you also need to know their direction. Because as it says there, if you don't know what they're trying to achieve or where they're trying to get, If you try and be proactive, that's just called selling. You're just selling them stuff because you have no clue whether it's going to help them or not. And I know most accountants don't like to just sell things. So if you want to be proactive, then probably what you're trying to do is satisfy needs, in which case establish direction first. It's sort of what I call establishing the North Star. So that's where we're going. And your job is not to help do all the businessy stuff, because there's loads of experts who can do that. Your job is to hold that client's hand and make sure that they keep heading towards that North Star. And as they veer off, as they inevitably do, pull them back and say, well, I thought we were going over there, and you seem to be veering over here. What are you doing? And it sort of just needs that bit of coaching. Plan. Once you've established a business, for the business to get there, it needs a plan to achieve that where everybody knows their role. And at its most basic, there are only 3 things that a business has to do. They have to plan to do 3 things. They have to plan to create value for the customer, which means having a value proposition that is enticing to the customer. And that's the only way you're going to create revenue. So create value for customer, maximize revenue. Once you've sold the thing, you have to deliver it. You have to deliver it efficiently and effectively. And that's the only way you're going to minimize costs. And ultimately, as a business owner, you have to do those first 2, a plan to create value, a plan to deliver efficiently and effectively. And that means you as a business owner can do the 3rd thing, which is capture the value for yourself, make a profit. And I don't care whether they're butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers, that's what they have to do. Maximize revenue, minimize costs, create a profit. Ultimately, the 3rd ingredient, so by the way, it's really easy to create a vision. It takes less than a day. I'm doing it tomorrow with a firm it's actually a CPA firm in Minneapolis. I know in 5 hours we will come out with a vision. I know that over the next couple of weeks we'll create a plan. The really hard thing to do is implement it and sustain it. And even though those people all said 10 out of 10, they're wrong. Their desire probably isn't 10 out of 10 because they stop implementing. And the biggest job that accountants can do is to hold their clients accountable for the change that they want to make. And if you agree the plan, then you can say to the client, tell you what we're going to do. I'm going to meet up with you every month, or let's say every 2 months, and you're going to tell me what you've done against the plan in the last 2 months. And I sort of make a joke of it. And I say to the client, let's say we've agreed to meet for an hour. If you have done nothing in the last 2 months, that will be the longest hour you've ever spent, because I ain't letting you off the hook. I'm just going to stare at you for 1 hour, and you're never going to do that again. And I sort of do it in a jokey way. But the truth is, when I turn up in a month's time or 2 months' time, they don't want to do that. So they've done things. And if you keep that process going, they start to implement and they start to make progress. So getting desire is a really important ingredient, but it's changed in the last 25 years. You see, when I first owned a business 35 years ago, the only thing that mattered was the desire of the business owner. And if I owned a business like I did, I'd say to the management team, I want you to do this, and they'd all salute and say, yes, Paul, we'll do it. And then they'd pass that on to the team, and everyone would salute and do it. And somewhere along the way in the last 20-odd years, employee teams have stopped doing that. They don't like to just be told what to do. They want to be engaged. And so the style that's most effective is to communicate and collaborate with your team and get them to want to make the changes and have the desire, if you like, to implement for you. And by the way, that one there is the second biggest change that's happened in business in the last, I would say, quarter of a century. That difference from a command and control type of leadership to a collaborative type of leadership. Probably the second biggest change, and I'll talk in a few more minutes about the biggest change. Half an hour. I'm doing okay. Okay, so having gone through what I'd call some context, we're now going to turn to what I think are the 6 most important aspects of business advice. By the way, this stuff is all built into the Hayden Rock system, so it's all done by process and system. But the truth is, you don't need the Hayden Rock system to understand these 6 pieces of key advice, and they form the cornerstone of every piece of advice I've ever given to any business client in the last 25 years, and I think they sort of cover 80% of everything you need to know, certainly in terms of establishing direction and business vision. So the first piece of advice is there are only really two strategies in the world. And again, I do not care what type of business you are in. There are really only two strategies in the world. Your number one strategic focus is either going to be adding value, or it's going to be get more efficient. And I'm going to use a sort of silly example of, let's say, an accountant's business. If you're a tax planner and that's all you did, you just did tax planning, advanced tax planning, saving your client hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars, it really doesn't matter how efficient you are. The only thing you've got to be is add more value. So your focus is on, let's say I say to you, I can save you $1 million of tax, which is obviously a value-added item. Your only focus is on making sure that we do add that value, and ideally add 2 million of value. It doesn't matter whether it takes you 1 day or 2 days or 3 days in terms of efficiency. So if you are only a tax planner, your only strategic focus is how we add more value to our clients. If instead you only did tax returns and looked backwards and told your clients how much tax they owe, your only focus in life is to get more efficient, because I promise you, you cannot add value to something that's already happened. And all you're going to do is get it right on time, get it right for the price, and you're going to be focused on efficiency. And by the way, although I've focused that example on an accounting business, it's the same in every business. They're either focused more on one or more on the other, or just conceivably both. And you see, it's quite likely that you do tax planning and you also do tax compliance, in which case you need to separate. And if I go back in my accounting business, I remember my best tax planner was a guy called Mike. And I said to Mike one day, how much of your time do you spend planning and how much of your time do you spend doing tax compliance? And I can't remember what the answer was, but he spent much more time on compliance than on planning. And I said, why don't you spend all your time on planning? Because we make more money there, and it's more fun. And he said, well, I have other things to do. And you see, what happens with people like Mike is we didn't separate, and he did both. And what happens is what I call Monday to Friday syndrome. And by the way, it happens in every business in the world, and by the way, it happens in your accounting business. If you don't focus your team on either adding value or being more efficient, what will happen is they sort of iterate. So on Monday, they add value. On Tuesday, they get more efficient. On Wednesday, they start trying to add value. On Thursday, they try and be more efficient. And by Friday, they're pretty crap at all of them, or mediocre, and they don't do either very well. If you separate and say, Fred, you do this, and Fiona, you do that, both of them get better at doing it. Going back in the old days at Latham's, we went to the nth degree, and we created 2 tax departments, the future tax and the past tax. And in the past, all you did was backward-looking stuff, and in the future, the only thing you were allowed to do was plan and add value. And guess what happened? We did loads and loads and loads more of it, because they weren't distracted, they were focused, and they didn't even have a code on their timesheet for doing compliance. They weren't allowed to do it. Mike never did another tax return again. But what he had to do was go out and talk to clients and understand what they needed. So either add value or be more efficient or separate. And pretty much every service business that you act for, they need to separate. Because usually, what they usually do is do too much for the money. And there's a little high jump bar there, and you can't see it, but the first bar is at 3 foot, the second bar is at 4 foot, and the third bar is at 5 foot. And what happens in most service businesses, and by the way, all accountants, is you sort of agree what you're going to do, but not very well, and you sort of say, I'm going to jump 3 foot for you, client, and it'll cost $3. And that's fine. And your biggest worry is whether you knock the bar off. And obviously, if you're not very good at jumping 3 foot and you can only jump 2 foot 11, you should worry about that. But most accountants, their biggest problem is not, or any business, most service businesses, their biggest problem is not their inability to jump 3 foot. Their biggest problem is stopping at 3 foot. And with that client, it's easy to not just jump 3 foot, but to jump 4 foot, or even 5 foot for some clients. And in an ideal world, you charge $5 for the 5 foot jump and $4 for the 4 foot jump and $3 for the 3 foot jump, but you don't do that. You agree to 3 foot jump, you agree to $3 price, you end up jumping 5 foot because you don't know where to stop, and you do too much for the money. And this whole concept of separation, you've got to put a bit of work into it. So what would you like, client? Would you like our reactive service? We're not going to do any forward-looking stuff. We're just going to do your tax return and your accounts. Or would you like a step up? Would you like the proactive service? Or would you like the strategic service? So they're all slightly different and they all cost more money, but what you're doing is you're giving the client choices. And if I say to you we did that back 20-odd years ago, 80% of our clients went up to at least 4 foot, and another 30% of those went up to 5 foot. It was because we gave them the choice. But we didn't just give them a choice, we also defined what they were going to get and the price. Now that concept of separation, I would say probably that's the single biggest selling item that I've had over the last 20 odd years. Because every service business you can think about, that design engineer I mentioned before, they have exactly the same problem. They recognize it, help them to separate. It's not a difficult concept. Number 2, there are only 4 ways to grow a business. There are only 4 things you have to do to grow a business. As I said before, I've grown an accounting business, took a business public, and so on. And every single one, I've applied this thinking process. And it starts from a nice, easy premise, which is if you're going to grow a business, you either have to increase revenue or decrease costs. I'm sorry, there ain't no other way. I mean, people will say things like, well, you can buy a business. Well, yeah, but all you're doing with buying a business is to increase revenue or to add new products so that you can increase revenue. Ultimately, business is about increasing revenue or decreasing costs. Decreasing costs I'll deal with in a minute, but there are basically 3 elements to revenue. You see, revenue is made up of 3 components. And by the way, it's the same for every single business. It's the number of clients you've got in a period, multiplied by the average number of transactions you do with a client, multiplied by the average dollar value per transaction. And to the cent, every person's revenue in this room is a factor of those 3 items. And every single one of your clients is a factor of those 3 items. And if you're going to, this has slightly gone off skew on there, but if you're going to increase your revenue, there's only 3 things you can do. You can either get more customers, or do more things with your existing customers, or increase the average dollar value per transaction. And this is sort of a brainstorming approach. That if you sit down with a client, you're beginning to do it in a structured way. So that's the very first question I would ask them. What's going to be easier? What would be your number 1 thing to do? Is it going to be win new customers, or let's just say do more things with the ones you've already got? And that's sort of an easy question. And let's just say they say win new customers. Well, then there's only about 3 things you need to think about. So what does a new customer look like? Have we defined the target? What do they look like? Secondly, what are we going to say to them? What's our value proposition? Do we need to get our value proposition improved? Thirdly, how are we going to demonstrate it? And so that begins to sort of mold strategy. If they said, no, we want to do more things with our existing customers, then it's probably got something to do with what I call a customer service process. Well, it's obviously going to start with a diagnostic. What do these clients want? If we're going to sell more things to them, what do they need? What do they want? And we can go from there. I'm not going to try and explain a customer service process. But the point is, it's a brainstorming tool. And I pretty much guarantee that any business owner client you talk to will immediately have an answer there. Are we going to try? What would our number 1 thing be? Win new customers or do more things with the ones we've got? And immediately you have a bit of a focus. The other way, by the way, of winning more customers is to acquire, we could do it the organic way, targets, value proposition, and so on. Or we could just go out and buy a business that will bring new customers to us. But ultimately, it boils down to that. The fourth area, reduce costs, takes you into, essentially, key business aspect number 3. There are only 7 areas of business waste in the world. And by the way, you'll sort of notice that I'm being pretty definitive. 4 ways to grow a business, 7 wastes. Clients quite like it, because it sounds like you know what you're talking about, and it sort of narrows it down, and it's easy to remember, and they don't argue, by the way. And by the way, it's true as well. So all of that's good, but it allows you to do this in a very systematic way. So what are those 7 business wastes? This comes from the Toyota model. Toyota started using this process back in 1948. That tells you a couple of things. They're still doing it today, 70 years later. So logic suggests they must think it works if they've been doing it for 70 years. And the second thing it tells you is you never, ever eradicate waste in a business. It's like the tide coming in and out. If you eradicate waste this year, I promise you it'll start creeping back in again next year. So it sort of becomes a eternal job for you to help your clients to do. Even better with waste, it's a great one for team building. I think I'll put it on the slide in a minute. But this is another brainstorming exercise. If we got a typical business owner, if we got 10 people from the team, from the bottom to the top, crossing all the business areas, I can pretty much guarantee in 1 to 2 hours, we would identify at least 50, probably nearer to 100 areas of waste, of where things aren't working great in their business. And it becomes quite a good team building exercise and part of how you can start working with people lower in the organisation. I'm just going to go back a slide. So what are these 7 wastes? I'm just going to whip through them. So number 1, defects. Where do things go wrong in the business? Where do they not go right first time? If something springs to mind, then it's probably a problem. Waiting. In my accounting business, this was the second biggest problem we had, waiting. We waited and we waited and we waited. We waited for clients to bring their books in. We waited, we had them on the shelves. We waited to get started. We half finished them. We waited to meet with the client to review it. We waited to finish it. We waited to send the bill out. We waited to get paid. It was an incredible area of waste. I thought we were incredibly efficient. We brought somebody in 20 odd years ago, and we looked at our realizations and recoveries, and I thought we were pretty efficient, 90% or something. The guy came in and said, "You're less than 10% efficient. If you were a manufacturing business, you'd have gone out of business years ago." He put processes in. By the time we sold the business, that whole area was, people didn't wait. Books came in, it was run like a manufacturing business. Waiting, I'll almost guarantee all of you have a whole load of waiting. Probably your biggest problem is over-engineering, the one I've already mentioned with the separation. You do too much for the money. There's not many accountants I've ever met who don't do too much for the money. But pose a question to your client, where do you do too much for the money? What about process? Have you got the right process? Have you got no process? Have you got an outdated process? Inventory. Why do we have so many unpaid bills? Why do we have so much work in progress? Why do we have so much stock of materials? Number 6 is internal movement. In the old days, it used to mean things like manufacturing layout. These days, in service businesses, it usually means bad communication. Where does bad communication happen? Inside the business. And then number 7, the opposite really, it's external transport. And it comes down to bad communication with the customer. By the way, as a tip, never do this brainstorming only with the business owner because they don't know. Do it with the team, preferably the most junior people in the team, crossing all departmental areas. And as I said before, I literally have never done this where we've not found more than 50 problems in a business. And they'll fall into 2 categories, by the way, if you fix them. They'll either be not very important, but really quick to solve, or they'll be very big and very important, but will take months to solve. And the real trick then to doing business advice is make sure we do quite a lot of those easy things. because they generate momentum. Things look like they're happening. We can check them off on our to-do list, and the team feel, great, we're doing something. If you wait for the great big item that's going to take months, everyone will get bored along the way. So that the sort of tip is to do one or two big things that are going to take a few months, but make sure there's plenty of small things to generate momentum. Keep coming back every month or two, as I said before, and see how they're getting on. And you're therefore beginning to add value to this business. Number 4, so we're going to grow our business. How are we going to resource our growth? Are you going to do it the old way or the new way? The 20th century model, if you wanted to grow a business, the 20th century model was to get more physical resources. We got more people, we took on a bigger building, or we maybe got more machines. And that's how you grew back in the 20th century. In the 21st century, it's probably, if your default thought is, it will be an intangible resource, you'll be right. So on the whole, these days, if you want to grow, I would strongly advocate that you don't get more people, you get more virtual people, whether that means subcontractors or whatever, but more virtual people. We don't get more buildings, we get more virtual premises. We outsource, we use technology, we rely on data and brand. All of those things have one thing in common: you can't touch them. And 80% of the average business value is intangible. In other words, it's not on the balance sheet, which, by the way, is another way of saying, in terms of your accounts, they're only 20% right. On average, the average business, the value, 80% of it is not on the balance sheet. It is intangible items like brand and data and knowledge and solutions and relationships and so on. That's what gives a business value. So if a business is going to grow, it probably needs to do it the 21st century way. As I said, 80% of average business value, that is the biggest single change in business in the last 25 years. Uber, they own no taxes, biggest taxi company in the world. Airbnb own no hotel rooms, biggest hotel company in the world. Amazon and so on. You can see where that's going. And that's why I mentioned earlier, you have a huge opportunity as small accountants to actually use virtual resources that cost you nothing, but allow you to look big and actually handle your best clients. What are we doing? Okay, 10 more minutes, we're okay. Number 5, measurement matters. There's a phrase, and most business owners don't use it, and you really should because you're accountants. Business owners can only manage what they measure. And there's only 3 things they have to measure. They have to measure things to help them with their decision-making process, and the sort of more contemporaneous they can make that, the better. So they need to look at the past, but preferably the very recent past. So those management accounts that you do, what I call management accounts, regular bookkeeping and accounts, they help the business owner to know what's happened in the recent past, but you need to do them contemporaneously if they're going to help with decisions. Future forecasts, have we got the financial resources to grow? Probably the biggest is the here and now, and where most business owners need some help. Key performance indicators. Don't just measure what happened, which is what accounts do. Measure activity. Are we seeing enough customers? What percentage of the customers we see did we win? And so on. Key performance indicators. And as a generality, most business owners need to concentrate on KPI measurement, but they don't really know what they should be measuring. And you can begin to help them. That's number 5. And then number 6, this is Stephen Drucker. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. There's actually 5 types of people in the world. I've got three up there. Your team is made up of 3 sorts of people: highly engaged, moderately engaged, disengaged. There's somebody above it called spiritual leaders, people like Martin Luther King, but you probably don't employ them. And there's people below it, like desperate people who, shoot people and so on, and you probably don't employ them. But you employ, in the average business, a combination of those types of people. And there's a ton of statistics. So the probability is, and obviously if you've got a small business, maybe it's not statistically totally accurate, but very typically, about 29% of your team will be highly engaged. And they're about 90% effective at work. Just over half of your team are moderately engaged, and they're about 60% effective at work. And then there's usually just a bit less than 20%, usually less than, I always say 1 in 5. There'll be 1 in 5 who's there but not really. And they're, if you're lucky, about 40% effective. And if you then extrapolate those numbers, the average business, which is probably yours, is about 66% effective. In other words, basically moderately engaged. And if you then compare that with a world-class business, a world-class business is around about 67%, i.e. 2/3 of the people are highly engaged, still 90% effective, and obviously less people are moderately engaged and much less people are disengaged, and they're 79% effective on average. And that doesn't sound, when you first say it, much of a big difference, but it's 13%. And per million of payroll, that means if they could get from average to world class, they could make 130,000 profit more. Now, truth is, it's probably quite hard to get to world class, but it is not hard to get halfway. It's not hard to get better than you currently are. And the reason why most people are not highly engaged is because they don't know why the business matters. You probably haven't developed a purpose. I mean, there's a very famous story about a cleaner who used to work for NASA back in the 60s. And I think it was President Kennedy visited one day and said to the cleaner, didn't know what he did, said, "What do you do?" And the guy didn't say, "I'm a cleaner." He said, "I'm part of the team that's hoping to get or aiming to get a man on the moon." In other words, he knew why the business mattered, and he'd bought into it, and he'd recognized. Now, question, have you articulated what you're trying to do with your business, to your team? Are you, our mission is to do lots and lots of tax returns by tax season. That probably isn't going to excite them. Or are we going to be, maybe something like, our goal in life is to basically maximize the potential of our business owners and begin to actually get them interested and excited in what they're trying to do. Okay, so that, I'm pretty much near the end. I've got 5 minutes or so left for any questions. That just summarizes those 6 aspects of business advice. If you don't need the Hayden Rock system to do this. Number 1, do we know if we're focusing on adding value or being more efficient, or do we need to separate? I can guarantee you, if you work for service businesses, they need to separate and provide the client with those choices. Number 2, there are only 4 ways to grow a business. Are you focused on winning new customers, doing more things with the ones you've got, or increasing the average dollar value per transaction? Or is it reducing costs, in which case go to number 3. Which of the 7 ways is your problem? How are we going to reduce inefficiency? 4, resourcing growth. Am I going to do this the old-fashioned way? Am I just going to keep on growing by new people and bigger buildings and so on? Or am I going to do it the 21st century way? The answer is the 21st century way. Give your clients some advice. Number 5, measurement really matters. You cannot grow a business without measuring the right stuff, and that really means KPIs. You probably can't measure more than 5 or 10. Which 5 or 10 are we going to really measure that make a difference to your business? And number 6, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Is your business average or world-class? Shall we actually do something about it? So, if you only talk to your clients about that stuff, I think you'll be adding some value to them. So that's really transitioning from backward-looking to forward-looking. The message really is don't wait until it's too late, because I mentioned the time machine right at the beginning. I promise you it's going to happen. This relying on the backward-looking stuff has got relatively few years left in it. If you're older and getting towards the end, it probably doesn't matter. If you're younger, you probably do need to focus on forward-looking, add-value services. Don't wait until it's too late. And that's me finished. I don't know if there's any questions. We've got 3 or 4 minutes for questions. Gentleman at the back.
What's the key words that people are looking for to find an advisor to do this? In other words, if we were going to promote this
Yeah.
in one simple sentence, what would you say?
Okay, the question was, what's the key word to sum up how the advisor... I think the key word is relevant. You need to become the most relevant advisor to your client. You see, I think you're probably trusted. In fact, most accountants are trusted. They're the most trusted advisor. That doesn't make them relevant. I think you've got to aim to become the most relevant advisor, and that means if the client has a problem, they phone you first. I had a business owner. I first acted for him when he had 3 shops. He sold jewellery. By the time I sold my accounting business, he had 120, and he was the most profitable jeweller in the UK. I sold the business 7 years before, and in 2008, he had a problem, and he still regarded me as the most relevant advisor. However you do it, you've got to become the most relevant advisor to your client, central to their needs, their go-to guy. Any other questions? Are we done? No other questions? Oh, gentleman over there.
So in the Hayden Rock Solutions, we have planned templates or processes in terms of the solutions that
Yeah, the question was in the Hayden Rock solution. And the thing is, I can't hope to show this in a 30-second answer to a question. And indeed, it takes a little while to look at it. But the quick answer is, yes, we do. Those 6 items are all built into a process. I'm doing one tomorrow. We're going to go through those 6 areas. As we go through them, the client is going to, well, they've already done a diagnostic, which has been built into it. I already know, before I've even met them, these are people I've never even met, and I've already identified 25 changes that they potentially need to make. Tomorrow we'll go through those 6 areas and a few more, and we'll no doubt identify a few more potential changes. And you see, that's way too many for them to do. So at the end of the day, we'll have a whole list of potential changes to get to their vision. And then we'll say, so which 5 or 6 are we going to concentrate on in your one-page plan? And we'll basically agree which 5 or 6 are the most important, click a button, they'll go to the one-page plan. The other 25 will go off to what we call the parking garage to come back another day. The ones that go to the one-page plan, that's our action plan. The next step is then to meet with that client in a month or 2, and how are you getting on, and so on. And that's how you begin to build advisory services, because I can promise you, if you don't have a structure to it, it's really hard to keep it going for years and years and years. But the quick answer is yes, but come and have a look at it. I think we're actually pretty much on time. I think there's maybe a minute before we're due to finish. So thank you very much for listening, and